know how it would turn out, and then suddenly on Friday night in Premier Boxing on Fox, I saw it. That's me. I'm from Nigeria in this case, and that is Efe Agba, and of course he's going against Curtis Harper. Curtis Harper saw the size difference and left the ring before the first match happened.
There you go.
That would be Greg.
There you go.
He left, walked right out at 30 years old. He said, you know what? I'm not getting paid enough.
There you go.
He left before the fight. The people in attendance were stunned. The opponent was stunned. Nobody gets paid. The trainer distancing himself from it.
What happened if you bought a ticket?
If you bought a ticket, you're in trouble.
That's the show right there.
I've never seen someone quit. Yeah, the guy was bigger
Maybe
and
he had
stronger,
a digestive
but you
issue.
gotta fight.
He could have had a digestive issue.
I thought it was about the money. No?
There you go.
No, he's not getting paid.
Look, yesterday, of course, Sunday, it was National Dog Day. Oh, yeah. I've got a great dog. She's 13 years old. There she is, Sydney Bruce, rescue dog, my first dog. First experience with that kind of unconditional love that requires everything from you. 60% of Americans believe that owning a pet can improve your lives, and that, of course, dogs do that in particular. And so Sydney, of course, pays her respects to America's dog, Jasper.
Oh,
but
yes.
there she is, cancer survivor. And it's if you don't have a dog, I'd recommend it.
And she
All
loves her
right.
toys.
Set your DVRs. Never miss an episode of The Five. Special report is up next. What's up, Brett Baer?
Hey, Greg.
How are you?
Good, thanks. This is a Fox News alert. I'm Brett Baer in Washington. Tonight, the Senate is honoring one of its own. Longtime Arizona Senator John McCain died of brain cancer over the weekend. Right now, his former colleagues are eulogizing him on the Senate floor. This occurs as the personal animosity between McCain and President Trump has extended beyond the grave. McCain made clear before he died President Trump was neither invited nor welcome at any memorial activities. And while not mentioning President Trump by name in a farewell letter written before he died that was read today in Arizona, McCain delivered a veiled rebuke of the president, saying, quote, "We weaken our greatness when we confuse our patriotism with tribal rivalries that have sown resentment and hatred and violence in all corners of the globe." For his part, up until a short time ago, President Trump did not issue a formal statement. That changed late this afternoon, and the flags of the White House spent hours today shuttling between half-staff and full. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Peter Ducey in Tempe, Arizona, tells us what McCain's death means politically for the U.S. Senate and possibly for the president. But we start off with Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel, live on Capitol Hill. Good evening, Mike.
Brett, good evening. The death of Senator John McCain was not a surprise after a lengthy battle with brain cancer. His colleagues here on Capitol Hill say his passion in the halls of Congress was second to none.
In more than 30 years as a senator, he never failed to marshal a razor-sharp wit, a big heart, and, of course, a fiery spirit.
John McCain's desk on the Senate floor has been covered in a memorial tribute.
We can try, as he did, to put country before party. We can try, as he always did, to speak truth to power.
There is also a push to change the name of the Russell Senate office building to McCain, where his office and the Armed Services Committee he chaired are located. Fellow senators are reflecting on McCain's role as a mentor and his leadership, particularly on foreign policy.
It is hard to fill the void. Without any question, John McCain believed in American exceptionalism. He used that perch, the perch of American exceptionalism, to challenge his fellow senators to look beyond themselves.
Following memorial events in his home state of Arizona, Senator McCain will lie in state at the U.S. Capitol on Friday, with a formal ceremony taking place in the rotunda that morning. On Saturday, a national memorial service will be held at the National Cathedral, with family, friends, congressional colleagues, staff, and some world leaders invited. Former political rivals and presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama are expected to eulogize McCain and not President Trump. Then on Sunday, a private memorial service will take place at the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, where McCain will be laid to rest. The friction between McCain and President Trump has continued even after the senator's passing. Fox News has confirmed President Trump decided against releasing an official White House statement on McCain following his death. Chief of Staff John Kelly and Press Secretary Sarah Sanders were among those pushing for a message from the White House praising McCain for decades of service that would have called him an American hero. Instead, the president opted to send a tweet Saturday night, and today he ignored reporter questions.
Mr. President, any thoughts on John McCain, sir?
Later, the president issued a statement saying, despite their differences, quote, "I respect Senator John McCain's service to our country, and in his honor have signed a proclamation to fly the flag of the United States at half-staff until the day of his interment."
Part of the McCain legacy was certainly a willingness to work with members on both sides of the aisle. That was before the word compromise became a dirty word. Brett?
Mike Emanuel, live on the Hill. Mike, thanks. Let's talk about the next steps politically after Senator McCain's death. Correspondent Peter Doocy is in Arizona tonight. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Brett. There has been a ton of talk about Cindy McCain possibly being appointed to succeed her husband in the Senate, and today a spokesman for the family deflected questions about whether or not she wants the job, but did say that the late Senator McCain favored a different demographic.
I think a Hispanic woman probably would have been his pick for a successor if he'd lived long enough to, had the opportunity.
Arizona's Governor Doug Ducey says he's going to wait until after McCain's funeral to name a successor, though. Brett?
What about, there's also obviously a primary tomorrow to replace retiring Senator Jeff Flake.
Yes, and the candidate whose poll numbers were once so high that they were seen as part of the reason that Flake decided to retire, Dr. Kelly Ward, is taking heat tonight because she wrote on Facebook, or she was believed to suggest on Facebook, that the announcement about McCain's cancer treatment ending was timed to hurt her campaign. She says now she sees how that message could be misunderstood, but denies the sentiment.
I was saying that there is a concerted effort out there to turn everything that we do back to the negative. And if you look at the press and you look at the social media over really the last 3 years since I started running against Senator McCain. And I ran against Senator McCain not because I dislike him as a person, but because I dislike his policies. I dislike his votes.
The frontrunner now in this race, Congresswoman Martha McSally, is confidently looking past the primary and to the Democrat running unopposed, Congresswoman Kyrsten Sinema.
I know the price of freedom. While we were in harm's way in uniform, Kyrsten Sinema was protesting us in a pink tutu and denigrating our service.
President Trump has not made an endorsement in this race, but he has pardoned one of the candidates for criminal contempt, Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who insists he'd be the most different than retiring Senator Flake.
I'm not going to go in front of the Senate and start bad-mouthing our commander-in-chief or criticizing him for everything he does. That's not going to happen with me. If I got a problem with the president, we'll go in the back door, talk about it.
You turn on the local news here in Arizona, almost no talk about the primary. It has been completely eclipsed by coverage celebrating John McCain's life, but the lack of attention might not make much of a difference because the Secretary of State's office tells us that a majority of ballots have already been mailed in. Brett?
Peter Doocy live in Tempe, Arizona. Peter, thanks. President Trump is cutting a new trade deal with Mexico and trying to rev up negotiations with Canada. The president is ditching the NAFTA name, saying the new pact with Mexico is simpler and better. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts has details tonight from the North Lawn. Good evening, John.
Brett, good evening to you. White House officials tell Fox News this is just the first shoe to drop in a plan to revamp some of America's biggest trade deals. The president, in addition to today's deal with Mexico, wants to cut ones with Canada, with Japan, the European Union, and then take on China, the biggest of all.
And I believe the president is on the phone. Enrique?
It was another Oval Office first. President Trump with the president of Mexico on speakerphone to announce a new bilateral trade deal with our neighbor to the south.
They used to call it NAFTA. We're going to call it the United States-Mexico Trade Agreement. We'll get rid of the name NAFTA. It has a bad connotation because the United States was hurt very badly by NAFTA for many years.
Outgoing Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto was as enthusiastic about the deal as President Trump was. He even said he'd like to give President Trump a big hug, though he acknowledged getting to an agreement was tough.
I am really grateful, Mr. President, and this has, of course, been a negotiation that has taken months. It's been difficult, complex, and a very hard negotiation altogether, with difficult moments, of course.
The biggest change in the trade relationship is rules of origin for cars. 75% of components used to build cars must be made in either Mexico or the U.S. 40 to 45% of auto content must be made by workers earning at least $16 an hour. The biggest loser in this deal, China, which has been skirting existing NAFTA rules by funneling cheap car parts through Mexico. The deal also increases trade in agricultural goods, keeping tariffs at zero. It all puts much more pressure on Canada to now make a deal. Canada was involved in three-way talks with Mexico and the U.S. before President Trump decided to do a one-on-one with Mexico first. As Canada's foreign minister headed to the White House to meet with Jared Kushner, a spokesman said, "We will continue to work toward a modernized NAFTA. We will only sign a new NAFTA that is good for Canada and good for the middle class." President Trump and his aides insisted new labor protections make this a good deal for American workers, but not everyone is convinced. In a statement, Ohio Democratic Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur said, "The details and the fine print matter more than a hasty self-proclaimed victory. As someone who fought with all I had to prevent NAFTA's passage and the trauma it wrought on American workers, I know the devil is in the details." President Trump spoke with the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau earlier today. The president is really putting the squeeze on China, saying that if the United States can't reach a deal with Canada, it is prepared to slap significant tariffs on Canadian-made automobiles. Brett?
John, thank you. A big day on Wall Street. The Dow surged almost 260 on word of this trade deal. The S&P 500 was up 22. The Nasdaq finished ahead 72. Those two last are record highs. Joining us now to talk more about the U.S.-Mexico trade deal and what's ahead, U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Brett.
As John just reported, the devil's always in the details. What are the details here? This is a principle, an agreement on principle, not a signed deal yet, right?
Well, that's because of the nature of the law we have to use. The Fast Track or Trade Promotion Authority requires us to have an agreement in principle. This is thousands of pages long, so this is not like some just idea. We've negotiated all the detail. But the way the law works, you have to announce agreement in principle, wait 90 days, and then sign. And during that 90 days, Congress has an opportunity to review. So no, it's an agreement. This is not a general idea. This is very, very specific.
But as of tonight, it's still a trilateral deal. NAFTA is still in place, technically.
Yes. Yes, NAFTA is in place, but what we have renegotiated is the Mexico part of it. A lot of the provisions are the same. We expect eventually to send up a notice to Congress. We're going to say we have an agreement in principle, as I say, which is a technical term, with Mexico, and we hope that we can get Canada to join.
And what about the prospect of that? I understand Canada is kind of itching to get in these negotiations now. Do you expect that because of this, it opens the door with Canada?
Well, it's our hope, but let's remember, we had almost a year of negotiations with Canada. We had trilateral negotiations for months and months and months. We had thousands of people at several rounds. The last few weeks, the president decided, let's focus on Mexico. Let's get a deal done with one. The truth is, he's right. It's very difficult to negotiate with two people at the same time. So we negotiated with Mexico. We got a great deal for them and a great deal for us. Now it's time for Canada to come to the table.
Well, speaking of the great deal, we heard some of the bullet points there in John's piece about automobiles specifically, 75% automobile content to be made in North America, up from the current 62.5%, and other specifics. But from a U.S. point of view, somebody sitting on the couch at home, how is this deal so much better than what we had in place?
That's the essence of the question. So first of all, the difference in the rules of origin for automobiles, which is about $200 billion worth of trade, is a huge part of what we do in this deal. The difference is even more than the 62.5% and the 75% suggests, because we've changed the way we calculate things. We've made it cleaner and easier, and we're going to have much more regional content in these cars and much more, essentially, U.S. content in these cars. So we've created a situation where there's more U.S. jobs, but there also will be more Mexican jobs, because we're going to squeeze out people who are not in the region. So it's a big, big win for manufacturers. It's a big win for agriculture. We've cleaned out a lot of the barriers to trade. And then in this sort of world of kind of modernization, we've made the best improvements ever in intellectual property, in digital trade, in financial services trade. I mean, this will be the new paradigm.
So if you were to put a dollar figure on what all that means for the U.S., is there a dollar figure?
Well, I mean, we certainly don't have one, and people will come up with speculation, but it's billions and billions of dollars of additional trade for both of us. But I believe there'll be an improvement in the trade deficit from the United States point of view, and lots of jobs get created by this. And let's remember, this has been a bad agreement. The president is exactly right. This agreement is bad. It has led to large deficits. It's led to the loss of manufacturing and other jobs, and it needed to be modernized.
So I've heard some people, President's supporters, saying that the money made in this renegotiation essentially will pay for the wall.
Oh, I don't have anything.
You don't have anything to say about that. No. All right, what about China? Listen to the president today about China.
We're working very much with other countries. China is one. They want to talk, and it's just not right time to talk right now, to be honest with China. It's been too one-sided for too many years, for too many decades, and so it's not the right time to talk.
Not the right time to talk. I mean, you have been talking with China, but is this all aimed at China?
Well, we have an $800 billion trade deficit, and the president realizes and has told her it's not sustainable. So you try to correct it one step at a time. NAFTA is hugely important. NAFTA is $1.2 trillion in trade. There's no bigger trade agreement in the history of the world than the NAFTA agreement is right now. But the fundamental problem for the United States is China. We have a very, very unbalanced situation there. We have $375 billion worth of trade. We've lost millions of jobs because of Chinese practices, which I believe are unfair, uneconomic. So we have to figure out a way to change the relationship with China. It's not against China. It's that our relationship has to change. And the president's very, very focused on that. You worked with the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, on this Mexico deal? I did. He was. I've worked with him on other things too. He's a dream to work with. He is a complete patriot who, by the way, is working for zero, and he was very effective. The deal would not have happened without him.
Last thing, you mentioned farmers there. What do you say to these farmers and some of these lawmakers representing them who say, listen, we're taking it on the chin here? How long is this going to last where we're going to feel the pinch, the farmers in the middle of the country?
Well, the president focuses a lot on the farmers. In every meeting we have on trade, he talks about workers, he talks about farmers and ranchers, just in every single one. And we are doing things to make it better for farmers, but let's not forget, we should be selling much more product in an open market to China and to a lot of other places. The farmers also have been treated badly. And we have to do something to kind of change this paradigm. And the president's made up his mind. We are going to change it. And the people that will benefit, literally among the most, will be American farmers. And they also are very patriotic, tough people. They realize we have to hurt a little bit in order really to benefit in the long run.
You think that paradigm is shifting, though? Can you sense that China is saying what's going on here?
Well, I don't want to predict what they're saying. I don't think they've ever seen anyone who has stood up to them like this and said, we cannot have this situation continue. It has to change. And the president is putting in place tariffs. He's doing everything else he can to make sure that American workers and farmers are treated fairly. That's just the fundamental rule for him. He's fighting for these people, and he's going to get a change.
U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, thank you for being here. Up next, the horrific end to a video game tournament in Florida. First News with some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 2 in Detroit, as free tickets became available this morning for the Aretha Franklin musical tribute have all been claimed. Ticketmaster officials say it took less than an hour. More than 40 artists will perform at Thursday's concert downtown. Franklin died earlier this month of pancreatic cancer at the age of 76. Public visitation begins Tuesday. Her funeral will be held Friday. Fox 28 in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, as the illegal immigrant suspect in the murder of a 20-year-old college co-ed gets a new lawyer and waives a preliminary hearing. Yesterday, more than 1,000 friends, family, and others gathered for the funeral of Molly Tibbetts. Her body was found in a cornfield in her hometown after a month-long search. And this is a live look at Honolulu from Fox 2, a cloudy Hawaii today. The big story there tonight, the celebration for the Little League World Series champions. The team from Honolulu won Hawaii's third title yesterday, defeating a Korean team team 3-0. The Hawaiian squad was undefeated in 12 games in the summer tournament, even as their home state still dealing with the effects of that hurricane, Hurricane Lane. That is tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.